In January of 2023, an internal affairs investigation revealed that Tennessee police officer Maegan Hall had engaged in sexual misconduct with 7 of her fellow officers at the Laverne Police Department. She later filed a lawsuit against her former department, and in it, she claimed that the department's all-male ranks made her feel trapped and exploited, claiming that her superiors and even the chief of police groomed her. In this series, I uncover the investigation, dissect the actual interviews of those involved, and dive into the scandalous files of the lawsuit claims made by Maegan herself. Welcome to Exposed. Scandalous Files of the Elite, the infamous exploits of police officer Maegan Hall. And we want to welcome everyone to the third and final part of the Maegan Hall saga. The police officer from the Laverne Police Department. And the last time that we left you, we had told you about the officers that got fired, the ones that were placed on leave, and of course, Maegan Hall being one of those that was fired from the Laverne Police Department. So a firestorm after all this is filed and these officers are fired and the internet goes crazy, as we told you in our last episode. It was meme city for Maegan Hall, and over time, Maegan Hall struck back. And on February 27th of 2023, Maegan Hall files a lawsuit against the city of Laverne, Tennessee, Burrell Chip Davis, Lewis Powell, and Henry Ty McGowan. Chip Davis being the police chief, and Powell and McGowan, of course, other officers involved in this incident. Now, when these lawsuits are filed, the person filing the complaint, the plaintiff, has an opportunity to kind of explain what happened in their own words. And I'm going to read you that explanation from Maegan Hall. Remember how I told you there's 2 sides to every story? This is her side. And the lawsuit explains that Maegan Hall was a vulnerable and optimistic 24-year-old woman who had applied to be a police officer at the city of Laverne, where Miss Hall sought role models at her new job, and she instead found predators. In a place of offering professional development, her supervisors and the chief of police groomed her for sexual exploitation. They colluded in using their authority to systematically disarm her resistance and entrap her in degrading and abusive sexual relationships, even sharing tips on the best ways to manipulate and exploit her. Maegan Hall felt trapped in the role assigned to her at the city of Laverne Police Department, and in an attempt to escape, she nearly killed herself. Then, the city blamed her for everything. This lawsuit seeks justice for Maegan Hall. So that was kind of the introduction to that lawsuit. She made a bunch of allegations. And in those allegations, they list some facts. They talk about Maegan Hall being a graduate of Middle Tennessee State University with a bachelor's degree in biology. And in December of 2020, she had applied for that job with the LPD, the Laverne Police Department. And she was 24 years old, 5'4" tall, and she weighed approximately 135 pounds. Now, part of the application process at LPD requires candidates to undergo a psychological evaluation. Miss Hall expressed concern about the psychological evaluation. She expressed it to Ty McGowan specifically because Miss Hall had a history of mental health problems, including alcohol abuse, anxiety, depression, and self-harm. So Sergeant McGowan told Miss Hall the specific questions that she would be asked and instructed her to lie about her history of mental health problems. It's important, y'all, to say this is her side. Could be true, could not be true. This is strictly her words. So she was hired by the Laverne Police Department on February 9th of 2021 and assigned to the second shift. And she was the only woman assigned to that shift throughout her employment with the Laverne Police Department. From the beginning of her employment, Ms. Hall experienced a workplace environment permeated with sexual innuendo, including male officers routinely discussing sexual preferences, attractiveness, and sex acts they had performed on women. A male officer describing to Ms. Hall's superior officer that he wanted to take care of Ms. Hall and that he would eat Ms. Hall out and that he would fuck Ms. Hall. I'm quoting y'all. Two male officers shared with one another within Ms. Hall's presence and while on duty photographs of their penises. Sergeant William Watson on multiple occasions made sexually suggestive comments to Ms. Hall. For example, in the spring of 2022, Sergeant Watson commented on Ms. Hall's tattoos and asked if she had any others. Ms. Hall responded she did, but they were covered by her uniform, and Sergeant Watson asked to see them, offered his personal number, and asked to meet off duty, and offered to show her some of his workout moves with obvious sexual innuendo. And in the lawsuit, a doctor was quoted. His name was Grant Simmons, and he outlines 7 stages of the grooming process. And I actually thought that this doctor did a great job of describing the grooming process and the stages involved. And the first is selecting the victim. Predators seek vulnerable targets in environments where predators are likely to receive adoration, respect, and be seen as upstanding members of the community. They exploit the inherent trust given to positions of authority and power where it can be very difficult for a target to perceive the behavior as anything other than genuine care and concern. People with psychological trauma are ideal targets. And the second stage is gathering information. Once a sexual predator has selected their target, the next stage in the grooming process is the development of a personal relationship. In order to identify their target's needs and vulnerabilities, the predator may seek to insert themselves as trusted authorities within their target's environment and use that position to gather information and present themselves as a genuine friend in order to disarm the target. And the third stage is gaining personal connection. Next, the predator uses the information gained to engage with their target in a us-only information and activity designed to build trust, create intimacy, and blur the lines between what is and what is not appropriate. Secrets are utilized by the predator to normalize non-disclosure of mutual activities. Environmentally, the predator seeks to make themselves increasingly seen as a true friend or a dedicated professional. The fourth stage, meeting the need and establishing credentials. In this stage of grooming and exploitation, the predator secures their credibility in the eyes of the target by exploiting information they have obtained and using it and their newly established personal connection to fulfill the identified need of their target. The predator may provide favors and benefits in order to amplify codependence and instill in the victim a desire to repay the predator. Priming the target. Next, the predator uses their established credibility to increase emotional dependence while engaging in escalating non-sexual touching, dirty jokes, conversations about sex, flirting, and innuendo. The predator may control the target through the veiled threat of removal of the predator's assistance or resources. Implicit or explicit coercion is an effective tool used by predators when priming targets for exploitation and abuse. And then creating the victim, instigating sexual contact. Once a predator feels their target is adequately primed, increasingly overt sexual interactions are introduced. The point where a target becomes a victim is usually carefully orchestrated by the perpetrator. But to the target, it may look and feel like spontaneous events that arose from an otherwise ordinary encounter. The skilled predator will use an already established activity as a platform to launch into sexual activity. And lastly, controlling the victim. Stage 7 involves a predator working to control the victim and their victim's environment in order to continue the exploitation. Secrecy, guilt, blame, threat, bribery, and promises of reward may be all used as tactics to control the victim. Using their victim's identified vulnerabilities, the predator will control their victim through fear, guilt, or by generating a sense of helplessness, isolation, and despair. Predators will often escalate their sexual activities to include increasingly deviant or humiliating encounters and then use their victim's participation to control them. Now that is from that doctor. So Miss Hall, she describes some sexual grooming by Sergeant Lewis Powell in particular. And she says that during her employment at the Laverne PD, Sergeant Powell was one of her supervisors, and he was more than 15 years older than Miss Hall. 6'2", he was approximately 220 pounds. And Sergeant Powell identified Miss Hall as a young, vulnerable woman in a department dominated by aggressive older men. He used his position as a second shift supervisor to befriend Miss Hall and learned about Miss Hall's desire to become a crime suppression unit officer. In early 2022, Powell targeted Miss Hall for sexual exploitation by abusing his knowledge of her personal circumstances, professional aspirations, and vulnerabilities to coerce her into sexual activities. He learned that Miss Hall was going through the process of buying a home with her husband and that process was extremely taxing on their relationship. So he positioned himself as a reliable source of companionship and advice regarding not only Miss Hall's career, but her marriage. He contacted Miss Hall through Facebook Messenger and offered his personal cell phone number. He complimented her physique and offered to show her workout techniques, and then leveraging his role with the crime suppression unit and his rank, Sergeant Powell promised to share with Miss Hall training and tips in order to ensure advancement in her career. Now, on or around March 15th of 2022, Sergeant Powell would bring up the topic of sex while he was on patrol with Officer Hall. He stated that he had played the game before and could keep it cool at work. And during one such conversation, Sergeant Powell directly propositioned Miss Hall for the first time. He stated that it's just sex. I can give you what your husband can't give you. And Miss Hall responded that she was not interested. Sergeant Powell persisted in his request for sex despite her resistance and stated that he was taking an interest in Miss Hall. And Miss Hall reminded him of himself when he first started at that department. That's what he told her. So Miss Hall looked up to Sergeant Powell as a professional role model and an authority figure who had the ability, honestly, to make or break her career. And despite Miss Hall's repeat denials, Sergeant Powell texted her during shift about how they could have a secret sexual relationship. So eventually Miss Hall, she gives in to Sergeant Powell's request for sex, and he tells Miss Hall to come in early for jiu-jitsu training at an off-site facility used by the department. So Miss Hall arrives and Sergeant Powell kisses her. He then pressured her to perform oral sex. Miss Hall, she expresses concern about the fact that they were engaging in this activity in public, but reluctantly agreed. Miss Hall explicitly stated that she did not want Sergeant Powell to ejaculate in her mouth. Despite her express limitations, Sergeant Powell forcefully held Miss Hall's head down as he ejaculated. Within days of the jiu-jitsu training, Sergeant Powell took Miss Hall in his truck after shift for a sexual encounter. She expressed a boundary by requiring the use of a condom, and Sergeant Powell agreed not to ejaculate inside her vagina. However, during sex, Sergeant Powell removed that condom, forcibly held Miss Hall in place, and ejaculated inside her vagina. He said that it was okay because he had a vasectomy. On another occasion, while engaging in sexual activity, Miss Hall noticed that Sergeant Powell was photographing or video recording her without her consent. She became upset and demanded that he delete that data. So Sergeant Powell, he assures her that he deleted that data. But based on a February 6, 2023 investigative report, at least one of these non-consensual, intimate visual depictions ended up in the possession of Sergeant McGowan and Chief Davis. Sergeant Powell also regularly instructed Miss Hall to delete text messages that would refer to their relationship, and he persistently asked for sex during shift when the two were alone together at the PD. Sergeant Hall would exchange in sexually charged communications involving explicit descriptions of sex acts. On several occasions between March of 2022 and October of 2022, when Miss Hall would make a mistake on duty, Sergeant Powell excused her mistakes on the condition that she performed sex acts with him later. Sergeant Powell would threaten her that if anyone finds out or if you sleep with anyone else, then it's over. Things are going to be different. Work is going to be different. Sergeant Powell used his authority as a supervisor to seclude Miss Hall and coerce her into performing sexual acts. On one occasion, Sergeant Powell secluded Miss Hall at a police substation and asked her to perform oral sex. Miss Hall declined, but Sergeant Powell would not take no for an answer. He begged Miss Hall to perform oral sex, saying he had blue balls and really needed it. Miss Hall felt that she had no choice but to continue to provide sexual favors to Sergeant Powell, so she performed oral sex as demanded. The sexual relationship with Sergeant Powell impacted Miss Hall's mental health and contributed to worsening of her psychiatric symptoms, including anxiety and depression, and she felt she could not get out of the relationship because Powell refused to accept her wishes whenever she told him she didn't want to have sex. On one occasion, when Miss Hall tried to end the relationship, Sergeant Powell called her while heavily intoxicated. Sergeant Powell was crying and told Miss Hall that he drank an entire bottle of Jack Daniel's whiskey. He threatened to kill himself and told Miss Hall, "You did this to me," and asserted that she was responsible for his imminent suicide. Miss Hall, she continued to experience anxiety, depression, and difficulty because of her inability to escape the relationship with Sergeant Powell. And on Memorial Day weekend of 2022, attended a party hosted by the Laverne Police Department Sergeant Eric Statz and attended by other officers. The only other woman at that party was Officer Maglioso's wife, who left early in the evening. Miss Hall and Officer Maglioso walked his wife back to her car, then secluded themselves and had sex before returning to the houseboat. When they returned, Officer Maglioso fingered Miss Hall in a hot tub as she was visibly intoxicated within full view of other officers. After several minutes, Miss Hall pushed away Officer Maglioso's hand from her crotch and said no. 10 or 20 minutes later, he poured vodka down her throat. Afterwards, Miss Hall and Maglioso had sexual intercourse in the bathroom of that houseboat. The events occurring at Sergeant Statz's party became widely known at the LPD. Sergeant Powell told Miss Hall that such a flagrant activity could lead to trouble, and he continued to leverage his position of authority to get sex out of Miss Hall. Sergeant Powell texted Miss Hall under the pretense of offering additional training opportunities, and Miss Hall would make excuses to avoid participating. Sergeant Powell did not accept Miss Hall's rejection. He told Miss Hall, "You owe me." Miss Hall submitted to further sexual acts with Sergeant Powell through October of 2022. Sergeant Powell secluded Miss Hall during shift at an archery range and stuck his hand down the front of her pants. He provided Miss Hall with special treatment at work and made sure she knew that he would not be doing this if they didn't have a sexual relationship. Sergeant Powell coerced Miss Hall to engage in sex acts despite her rejection and non-consent. After violating Miss Hall, Sergeant Powell said things like, "I could tell you really weren't into that." Or he would say, "You must really care about me. Thank you for letting me finish. It shows how much you really care." When Sergeant Powell wanted sex, he refused to take no for an answer. He continued demanding sex, saying things like, "We'll do it tomorrow," or "I've done so much for you. I've helped you, and I've done so much for you in your personal life." The sexually coercive environment on the second shift at the Laverne PD triggered increasingly severe symptoms of mental illness from Miss Hall. These symptoms impacted her ability to perform her job, and on July 14th of 2022, she reached out to Sergeant Powell to convey her distress and its impact on her ability to perform her duties. Sergeant Powell told Miss Hall that if she sought help for her psychological distress, she'd be thought of as a weak female officer and no one would trust her. He warned her against reporting her issues and advised her to suck it up and focus on work. Within hours after the call to Sergeant Powell, Miss Hall was involved in an on-duty collision. Miss Hall was operating her patrol vehicle. She attempted to merge lanes but failed to yield to another vehicle that caused a collision and property damage to both vehicles. On October 21st of 2022, she was involved in yet another collision while on duty. She was leaving the police station to respond to an assault but pulled out in front of a van and caused a wreck. She was injured and transported to the hospital for treatment. So that's Miss Hall's breakdown of her side of the story with Sergeant Powell. And then she goes into Sergeant Henry Ty McGowan, who was a supervisor on her second shift. He was 20 years older than Miss Hall, and he's 6'1" and weighed 240 pounds. Now, during her employment with the Laverne PD and within the workplace, she continuously engaged in sexually charged behavior, and she lists some of that, including Sergeant McGowan smacking Miss Hall on the butt at the police station. He would refer to himself as Papa Bear and hug her so tightly that he would lift her off the ground. During some of these hugs, Miss Hall said that she felt a bulge that she believed to be Sergeant McGowan's semi-erect penis pressing against her. He would proposition Miss Hall for sex, and he would specifically state, "I want to bang you. Please use me for sex, and I want to eat you up." He would make sexual moaning noises when Miss Hall would walk into her room. He would make comments about how good she looked in her uniform pants. He even offered to pay and create an account on Feet Finder for Miss Hall. There you go. Feet Finder. I guess that's a foot fetish site. Between February of 2021 and October of 2022, Miss Hall repeatedly declined to participate in any sexual activity with Sergeant McGowan, and despite her reported objections of Sergeant McGowan's sexual advances, he continued to request such favors. And then she also goes into Chief Burrell Chip Davis and some sexual grooming she claims he attempted. At the time that she joined the LPD, Chief Davis was the highest ranking commanding officer in the department. Chief Davis told investigators that in a text message, which is dated October 25th of 2022, Sergeant McGowan sent him a photograph of a black male foot inside Officer Hall's mouth. Immediately thereafter, Chief Davis said the following exchange, and this was between him and Sergeant McGowan via text message. Chief Davis said, "Who dat?" Sergeant McGowan said, "Hall/Lewis." And Chief Davis said, "He on it again?" And Sergeant McGowan said, "He swears he ain't." And Chief Davis said, "She nor her husband took that picture?" And Sergeant McGowan said, "She has a tight little ass, though." And Chief Davis said, "Yep." And then on October 28th, the exchange of messages continued. And Chief Davis said, "The fuck Lewis saying to these hoes, 'cause normal pimp shit ain't working." And Sergeant McGowan said, "No fucking clue. He killing it." Chief Davis said, "Maybe goody shit." Sergeant McGowan said, "Gotta be. I can't do it. Gorilla pimp." And Chief Davis said, "Only way I know." Then he says, "Does she talk to you?" And Sergeant McGowan says, "Nope. She getting too much attention." And Chief Davis said, "Oh, I see." And Sergeant McGowan said, "It's all good." And Chief Davis said, "I saved her for the last time. I wish she could tell the whole fucking story. Can't do shit for her." And Sergeant McGowan said, "I wish I could too. Then we both could play." And Chief Davis said, "Can't fuck Lewis though, 'cause the pics are fire." And the complaint goes on to say that Chief Davis repeatedly attempted to seclude Miss Hall so that he could use his authority, or as he described it, normal pimp shit, to induce Miss Hall to gratify his own sexual desires. He explicitly and implicitly engaged in sexually charged behavior permeating in the workplace, including asking Miss Hall to come into his office and dance for him, providing his personal number and suggesting lunch dates with him, complaining about his marital problems and stating he was lonely, and characterizing Miss Hall's clothing as hot girl summer shit. He also said that he will harass her and make it fun, and asked whether Miss Hall preferred dark, white, or milk chocolate with sexual undertones. So let's talk about Chief Davis. When Miss Hall decided to sue all of these people, they hired their own private investigators who dug up a lot of dirt on Chief Davis. One of those things was a secret cell phone that he maintained, and he actually had a nickname for it. It was called Old Boy. And this was uncovered originally by Human Resource Director Patton. When Patton was interviewing Chief Davis, he said, "So there's a document here. It says Chip's secret phone. Do you have a third cell phone?" And Chief Davis said, "Yeah, but he no longer owns that phone." It was found out through investigators of the plaintiff, in this case, Miss Hall, that Old Boy was the name of that cell phone. And although it was a burner phone, it could receive text and all that sort of thing. And it was specifically a phone they dug up that was used to talk about all these sexual situations going on at the Laverne Police Department. So on December 8th of 2022, according to the complaint, Miss Hall began to cut herself in an effort to work herself up, which she described as the ultimate act of taking her own life. And also on December 8th, she was committed for psychiatric treatment at St. Thomas Ascension, which is a hospital in the area, a mental hospital in the area, for 72 hours, where she actually received treatment for bipolar disorder. So these investigators, they continued digging on Chief Davis during all this, and they were trying to prove that Chief Davis knew about all this stuff going on and did not report it. And they came across some text messages, and that was on December 9th of 2022. And it's Chief Davis talking or texting Sergeant McGowan. And Chief Davis says, "PMAG trying to put up smoke and mirrors, and it's going to come back to bite him." And Sergeant McGowan wrote, "Really? Already?" Chief Davis said, "He's telling Comrade everything but I fucking her." Sergeant McGowan put LMAO. Chief Davis put, "Between you and I, if it comes out about Lewis," and he's referring to Lewis Powell, "and he has not said anything, he is toast." So the investigators and the plaintiff's attorney wrote a conclusion to their findings regarding Chief Davis. And they said Chief Davis was aware of inappropriate sexual activity between officers, including superior officers, subordinates, as well as the widespread sharing within his department of nude photos and videos of female officers. He admittedly received some of these inappropriate photographs and videos and never voluntarily disclosed doing so. Chief Davis never reported this activity to Human Resources, nor did he discipline any of the officers. When Officer Hall was hospitalized on December 8th of 2022, Chief Davis did not report his prior knowledge of sexual activity with Sergeant Lewis Powell. When Hall and Powell denied sexual activity during the initial investigation, Chief Davis did not disclose to Director Patton or others he knew or even believed them to be lying. Finally, this document is evidence that compels us to a conclusion that he misled Director Patton in his interview and that he misled the investigation. One final note, Much has been written in popular media about a particular incident detailed in the investigation report as a so-called Girls Gone Wild hot tub party. This matter, however, neither is about girls nor going wild. It has cost persons their career, their health, and their families. It costs the city and the community. Given time, the costs will rise and spread to many other officers who upheld their oaths, the city officials who acted honorably to uncover the truth, and the innocent friends and families of those who did not know. Responsibility also is shared. No one person is at fault for these events. In this matter, however, our investigation found that one person possessed a unique combination of information, authority, responsibility, and opportunity to change the course of the events. That's Chief Davis, and he did not speak up. So if you're curious, on February 6th of 2023, Chief Davis was terminated as Chief of Police of the Laverne Police Department. So that is a wrap to this week's episode. Next week, we will delve into another episode of Exposed, Scandalous Files of the Elite. And this time, it's the files of Sean P. Diddy Combs. And you won't believe what you're going to hear. Until next time, much love.